Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. This is our Americans for Peace Now webinar. I'm Lior, and with me behind the screens is my colleague Claire Davidson Miller, who is going to help me navigate this webinar. Our topic today is settler violence, and we're going to discuss it with two leading experts on this issue. I'll introduce them in a moment. Before that, our usual housekeeping comments. I'd like to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. A video recording will be posted to our YouTube channel later today, and an audio recording will be posted to APN's podcast, Peacecast, along with a written transcript. I'm also reminding you that you're encouraged to ask questions, and as you know, you do that using the Q&A tool that is at the bottom of your screen on the left-hand side, I think. Our guests today are probably familiar faces for most of you. They're good friends whom I admire greatly. Hagit Ofran is the co-director of Settlement Watch Project at Israel's Peace Now, Shalom Achshav movement. She's widely recognized as one of Israel's foremost experts on anything and everything related to Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And Lior Amihai is the executive director of Yeshdin, an Israeli human rights organization that monitors, researches, and conducts legal and public advocacy regarding violations of human rights of Palestinians in the West Bank. Before joining Yeshdin, Lior was a co-director with Hagit of Peace Now's Settlement Watch project. So in the words of Sister Sledge, we are family. And my daughters are going to kill me for making a disco reference in this. If you follow the news from Israel, you have undoubtedly noticed that there is a serious uptick in reporting on settler violence targeting Palestinians. We wanted to shed some lights on this trend, and this is a trend, with the help of these two experts who are out there and actually know the lay of the land and closely follow the dynamics on the ground. If you're interested in reading up a little more about this issue, we have a new article on this written by our great intern, Kate Sosland. She wrote a piece that is on our website right now. And after the webinar, when we send out the post-webinar email, there will be a link to that article in that. We are lucky to have a presentation that Hagit has prepared for us. So we'll let her go first and show her presentation, and then she will pass the baton to Lior, who will make some comments, and then we'll open it to questions. So Hagit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ori. Thank you, APN, for organizing this. And congratulations for the 40th anniversary. Although for our kind of movement, it's not a party that we exist 40 years. We wanted this to end before, to achieve our goals before. And like I say, when many Israelis would say to me, "What are you talking about peace now? There is no peace now." So I said, because of that, we need peace now. So our depressing subject of today is the settlers' violence. And I would like to try to tell you a little bit about what we see on the ground, and maybe try to find some explanations to why is it so wide, and more than just to say that it's inevitable when you have ongoing occupation, when you control another people, violence will be part of it. I wanted to introduce to you with a trend that is ongoing in the last, I would say, maybe 4 years or 5 years. And it is the farm outposts. This is a map of the farms that we know of, and what we saw in the last 4 years is 46 farm outposts that were established throughout the West Bank. That's a lot in terms of new settlement points. And what does it mean, and how does it connect to settler violence issue? So first of all, what does it look like? It's a small, usually a small farm with several youngsters, usually one family, young couple, with maybe some children, and volunteers who come and help them out in their farming. Usually it's about sheep or cattle that they grow. And what they do every day is to go around with their sheep and to make sure that the lands around the outpost are Israeli controlled. They would, all of them would have an old truck that is used for housing, and I think they do it so that it's less permanent. When they you don't see it as a structure when it comes to the site, so you cannot just order a demolition order, but it is a structure, and soon after it's there, it's connected to the ground, and they enlarge it and everything. But that's an anecdote. But it also means that it's illegal. I mean, the construction of those structure are without permits. They would bring sheep, as I said, and how do they make sure that the surrounding of the area are controlled by Israelis? Here I would like to share with you some things that the head of Amana, Zambish, Zeev Hever, said in a symposium that was arranged by Amana in February. They called it the battle for state land. It's part of the discourse that is very strong now in our issue, that the settlers are talking about the battle over Area C, the battle over state land, which means that they want to kick out Palestinians from those areas. And he describes this new phenomena of establishing those farms and saying settlements, and I'm reading what the quote, the settlements seizes in effect about 100 square kilometers. That's what it's in our hand. And this development is insignificant. Construction is always on little land due to the financial consideration, which are expensive. And therefore, we have arrived at 100 square kilometers after 50 years. And he's talking about the standard historical settlements where they bring a group of people to live on a hill and to have a settlement. And those settlements only, in his word, take 100 square kilometers of the West Bank. The shepherding farms, however, in the past 3 years, today they cover close to twice the land that the build-up communities cover, meaning that they manage with much less investment. Instead of bringing a group of people to settle in a place and to build all the infrastructure and houses and everything and services, no, they only need youngsters, some sheep and light construction, and there you go. You take over a huge amount of land. And how would they work? And in this symposium, we were lucky that the COVID started and they did it on Zoom and we could register because usually they do it on closed doors and it's much harder to go in. But they introduced the way they work, and there were some people who live on such a farm explaining how they do it. And every morning they start with taking out the drone around the area to see if there's anybody approaching. And if they see a Palestinian shepherd or a farmer that is going near to what they see as their land, which is state land, either officially or not officially, and they would call the army and say there are Palestinians here that are not supposed to be here. And if the army comes fast enough and kick out the Palestinians, they're satisfied. And if not, they would go there to scare them away. And some of those farms or those settlers are more polite and would use more the army, and some are more violent and they will use more violence. So this is a drone from the last few weeks in the Jordan Valley, for instance. Sometimes they use the drone to scare the herds away, to scare the sheep away. Sometimes, this is from last week in the Jordan Valley, in this video, there was the settler who has such a farm near a settlement called Chemdat. He ran with his car to kick out the goats here in this area, the Palestinian goat. Or in another place, also this picture is from 2 months ago. There is a spring also in the Jordan Valley where the cows of this Palestinian shepherd would drink every day from this spring, and settlers came and put this fence so that the cows cannot go access to this spring. It's illegal, and someone gave them all the money and the facility in order to put it up, and it's a fact now. Although there is a demolition order to this fence, I don't know if it's already. I don't know that it was implemented. I don't think it was implemented. And this phenomena of I said 46 farms brought to very big increase in the friction or in the violence of the settlers against Palestinian farmers in order to try to kick them out, as I said, from what they see as what should be controlled by Israel in Area C. And then we have another kind of violence, which we are familiar for many, many years. Cutting off trees. This is a picture from this week on Sunday it was, in Tuane, South Hebron Hills, that those olive trees are cut. This picture from Yeshdin is from Marda, a Palestinian village in the heart of the West Bank near Salfit, where the settlement Ariel is built. You can see the Palestinian car spray painted and the tires are cut. These attacks usually happen in the night by a few youngsters, settler youngsters. We have attacks on that you have settlers not coming in the night and making damage to something, but coming in the day, organized, or going down to the village and throwing stones. This picture is on the roof and some solar panels are damaged. And the way it would look like would be that you see a group of settlers going down on a Palestinian village, and they are escorted by the Israeli army. And why the Israeli army, the IDF, is going with them? Because their job is to protect the Israeli civilians in the West Bank. So when the settlers go down on a village, they would go with them to protect them. And if the settlers are doing the attack, usually they will not stop them, or if they try to stop them, it will be only by saying stop it, but not with serious tools to really prevent it. And then when the Palestinians retaliate and throw stones at the settlers, the automatic reaction would be to throw the tear gas at the Palestinians. So the picture eventually is that we have Israeli military escorting the group of settlers to attack the Palestinians. And that's something that we see again and again, and it's horrible. And I believe that people from outside of Israel cannot understand how come the army is protecting such acts. And it got to a very, very extreme situation in recent months. This picture is from June with the settlers with a military gun in South Hebron Hills. This picture is from May, where together with the military forces, you had settlers who got the gun from the army. And in this specific case, near Nablus in Uwif, a Palestinian was shot dead. At the same day, there were 3 of those attacks around the West Bank. It was organized. It was at the same time at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in many places around the West Bank. Settlers went to attack the Palestinians, and jointly with the army, and the army actually acted as if they have this the settlers as militias with them. And this escalation is very much problematic. The settlers are arranging this. We're talking about dozens of people who take part of those attacks. And maybe later I would try to elaborate a little more of how or why.
Thanks, Hagit. Lior, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ori, and thank you, Hagit, and thank you, APN and Peace Now. This does feel like a family or home. So thank you for inviting me and for this awful and dreadful topic to speak about. In a word, I'll just say about Yeshdin, it's an Israeli human rights organization that was founded in 2005 in order to deal specifically with settler violence. And the way it deals with this is by helping Palestinians, assisting Palestinians to file complaints to the police in cases that they want to do so, and doing it in massive numbers for the purpose that we'll be able to be a guardian, in the sense of that will be an expert body that can talk about how law enforcement is being played out in the West Bank on the issue of settler violence. We've duplicated that also to criminal offenses by security force personnel, so by soldiers, by police officers, and also deal with the issue of land takeover, land grab, the land theft, the fact that settlers and settler bodies and the government and the military take over Palestinian lands. And we assist Palestinian landowners to get access to their lands or to get back their property rights. Now, I want to say to begin and by just saying that settler violence is a form of violence in the occupied territories. It's one of the uglier sorts of violences that we see in the occupied territory, in the part of the occupation. Of course, it's not the only one, but it is one of the uglier ones. And the sort of thing that I want to argue, or that Yeshdin argues for so long, is that settler violence is a tool for achieving political aims. It's a tool that serves the government, serves the government of Israel, the policy of taking over of land, and therefore it is flourishing, therefore it is successful. The second sort of argument says that the law enforcement bodies, the institutions, the police, the military, the courts, they are failing in their position, and that encourages settler violence. So we've got this, is one of them is that the purpose of the settler violence is actually in the same sort of goals of the settler institutions, bodies where leadership was leading this, and then the law enforcement bodies sort of follow through and fail. There is some optimism, maybe we'll end with that. Maybe there is a shift that we can sort of discuss at the end, but it's tricky. So what is the purpose of settler violence? There's two, I guess, two that we evidently see. First is land takeover. And indeed, as you know, and as you read from Hagit's reports, there are so many ways of taking over land, right? You can build settlements, outposts, you can declare lands as state lands and then allocate them to settlements, national parks, touristic sites, archaeological sites, so many different ways. And settler violence is just one of those tools. It is being used when the other tools are not being played out. And that's when we see it. Now, the second sort of, and you know what, and maybe I'll say that the governments of Israel, and I'll say this sort of goes to the first argument, support this taking over of land. And it's not only the government, it's also, if look at Trump's plan, for example, right? We maybe forgot it, but just last year, Trump's plan basically stated out that the last home that the settlers will be able to capture will be the border of the state of Israel. Now, this is an incentive to take over more and more lands. This is an incentive, therefore, for settler violence. So this is how these two sort of correlate. So maybe if you'll hear leaderships, the leaders will condone settler violence, etc. But in fact, it does play out and they sort of intertwine. And the second sort of goal is intimidation. It's to terrorize the Palestinian communities. And again, under the occupation, there's so many other ways to intimidate the Palestinians. You've got military trainings and checkpoints and invasions to Palestinian homes. And you've got the Secret Service, the Shin Bet, and cameras, and the bureaucracy of the occupation and the permit regime, right? But unlike other sorts of intimidation, settler violence is not institutionalized. And the second thing that maybe makes settler violence slightly different is that it has sort of a message to the Palestinians, and that message is very, very clear. But also it has a message to the military and to the state. To the state, the settlers are saying, "Don't mess with us, right? You'll destroy one tent that we captured, one agricultural farm, one home. We'll show you who you're messing with. We will fight. This is our war." To the military, they're saying, you guys are serving us. This is about us. When you're not doing your role as how we see it, then we come in. We will attack these Palestinians because you're not doing it enough. And of course, to the Palestinians, it's get out. This is not your place. This is ours. This is God given to us. You're not welcomed here. The land that you're living on is actually our lands. Now, it is done through, and Hagit mentions, sort of categorized sorts of settler violence. And indeed, you see shooting and stone throwing and damaging to trees. You're seeing attacks inside Palestinian communities, more and more so. And of course, the graffiti and the hate crime. And, you see, anyway, you're all very much aware of the dreadful images. Now, intimidation, just like settler violence, also serves the main goal, right, that correlates with the state's sort of position here, because they're saying it allows sort of the courts to argue. It allows the state to argue that these are, settler violence are the extreme. They are marginal group. They're a minority. They don't serve us. And it allows us to make this differentiation, right? So it's them and not us. It's only this minority we're dealing with. It's only 100 settlers who do this sort of violence, but not us. And that's how it plays out with sort of the, why it's in the state's interest to discontinue, right? Because it allows us to say, oh no, we're tackling settler violence, but then the main purpose continues, right? It allows the state of Israel to say, oh, we're good, we're okay. It's only them that are the bad ones. Now, more concretely, and when we talk about the sort of the second why this is flourishing is the role of the law enforcement institutions. And this is what we follow very, very closely at Yeshdin. And I'll start with the military and that picture that Hagit showed, terrific picture that you saw the soldiers standing right next to it. It was the military police standing right next to the border police standing right next to the settlers. We see it all the time, and there's so many footages of that you see soldiers standing idly by next to settlers while they're attacking Palestinians. Now they don't do enough. They don't do anything to stop the settler violence that they're supposed to. Now, according to international law, according to minimum, the lowest standard of morality, you're supposed to protect those who are under occupation. They are a protected population. The Palestinians don't have any other body to protect them. And they are expected to stop. Once there is a criminal offense being committed, the soldiers are in the shoes of the sovereign. They're the people who are supposed to be responsible for this situation. And they're supposed to hold the settlers while they're attacking to prevent them from doing so, to arrest them, to stop them, even until the police come. But they are the people who are supposed to do it. It's the soldiers' role. It's the soldiers' authority. It's their, they're obliged to do so. And they have the responsibility and authority to do so. Now, and I'll just say something about the police, just because we have vast amount of data about this. And just this week, it was published in Haaretz, some data, some more information, just to show you the grasp of the quantity about this. In 2019, the military counted for 363 incidents of settler violence. In 2020, 507, and in 2021, in the first half of 2021, we're already at 416, and that was earlier this week. So, and that's why we're talking about this, because of this spike that Ori referred to, because of this escalation. Look at these figures. So in 2019, in a year, we had 363. That's an incident a day. In 2020, 507. In the first half, we're already at 80% of 2020. In Yeshdin, we documented in 3.5 years, much less, because we don't document all incidents of settler violence. We just document the ones that we deal with, that we take testimonies, and we documented for 540 in 3 years. And some statistics, so out of these 540, in 302 cases, that's 56%, Palestinians chose not to file a complaint. And the reason they did that is because they're intimidated by the system. They fear that if they'll file a complaint, then the institutions will retaliate, that they will revenge them, that the military will attack them, the settlers will attack them, that the Shin Bet will not approve them working permits to come in Israel. And maybe first and foremost, they just don't trust the system. They don't trust that they will provide justice. And why should they? Because out of the 540 cases that we counted for, in 238, Palestinians did choose to file a complaint. Now, 22% of these are still under investigation. So that's one of the problems, right? These investigations could take for months and years, and they're not efficient, and the police don't do what they're supposed to. Only in 12, that's 12 of 238 cases of files were complaints, out of 540 cases that we accounted for, and over maybe 1,500 of what was documented in our. So we've got 12 indictments filed. In the rest, 173, the cases were closed. So meaning out of the 238 cases that were filed complaints, 94% the police chose to file a complaint. And 86% of them, it's admittedly by the police because they are saying we failed. They're saying a criminal offense occurred. but we failed the investigation. We couldn't find the person who did it, these sorts of stuff. Now, I think, we can talk more about other sort of stuff and other sort of reasonings, but I think Hagit's presentation was just so thorough. So maybe I'll end here and you know what, I'll end here and maybe we'll open up some other things in the Q&A. I think that's enough.
Great, thanks, Lior. So just to clarify, so the really small minority of indictments, and then the question is, of those indictments, how many cases have actually reached fruition with finding people guilty?
So we don't have statistics for that, but we do see a problematics with that as well. First of all, we are talking about a very low number in the first place. And then often there is much easier or softer sort of punishment. It's unparalleled, of course, to Palestinians, right? And that's what I was sort of hinting at saying, maybe talk about the conclusion and what we sort of came out with a legal opinion discussing the situation in the West Bank, referring it to an apartheid sort of, the crime of apartheid is being placed out. And it's evident through this, because you see that the courts are very soft when Israelis attack Palestinians, very harsh when it's the other way around. And so yes, your point taken. Yes, absolutely. The courts do also have a role in this as a law enforcement institution, and they're failing to.
So I'd like to ask you both. We already have some questions in the Q&A. I'd like to encourage people to ask more. We'll get to them in a moment. But the one thing that I wanted to ask you to underscore, this is it's a topic that we have addressed in the past. We're trying to underscore what are the changes, what are the trends, what is new about what we've seen in recent months and maybe years in settler violence. Hagit pointed out one phenomenon, which is the agricultural farms, which create much more friction. But what else do you see that you think has changed, and how would you characterize the change?
Hagit, do you want to go ahead, or should I say something?
Please, Lior, go ahead.
Okay. I'll be very quick. I think 3 things that we've noticed. One is we saw an increase since the pandemic. From March last year, we saw immediately that violent settlers were taking usage of the restrictions of movement that were imposed due to the COVID pandemic. So that's one sort of when we sort of noticed it. But I think the main is sort of when we started seeing it sort of parallel together with the Trump plan, in the sense that this is settler violence is a political tool, right? They use it to achieve political aims, that land takeover, right? Intimidation. And when the Trump plan came out, and we saw that they were fighting back, and we saw that this was, they understood that they need to take as much in many more places as possible. And I think Hagit's point, the explanation, the very detailed clarification of what these settler farms, the agricultural farms that we're seeing, this is it. This is now, they're talking about it, the battle for state land, the battle from Area C. This is the latest terminology of how they refer for taking more lands. This is this tool. And so this is what we're noticing in recent years, at least.
I would like to point out another trend about that I think is deepening, although it was always there. And I think it's the involvement of the military and the settlers. I think it was always very much connected, in the past, before the establishment of Israel, the civilians in the settlements at the borders were the fighters, were there to protect the borders, and they copied it into the way the Israeli army is working in the West Bank, and the settlers are part of the military forces there. I don't have time to go into details of that. So that's like very much working together. And when the army comes to a place, like if they, they do like 3 months in an area, the settlers will tell them, here is where we are at. This is the place. Like they carry the knowledge to some extent. So it's very much it goes together very closely. And also, I think that the trend within the Israeli military that is becoming more and more national religious people that are sending settlers see the army as one of the important places for them to be. And the army, the people in the army are changing and it's becoming more and more settlers. And it has effect.
I'm going to start taking questions from our attendees. We have quite a few questions here. The first kind of cluster of questions that we were asked has to do with the issue of the agricultural farms, and people are asking who is funding them. So maybe in general, we can talk a little bit about the funding, not of so much of the official settlements, but more the outposts, which, if I understand correctly, for the most part, are the origin of settler violent acts. Who's funding them?
Because it's illegal, they don't really tell. But we see that there is a lot of public money there, mainly through the local authorities of the settlers. They get funds from the government to give all the services to the settlers, and they use those money also to help set up those outposts. We have the Amana organization, which is very strong. We have a very long report trying to explain how the funding of all this works, but eventually a lot of it is from public money. They also have some donations, and they sometimes even fundraise, for crowdfunding. But mainly it's the public money. And I also wanted to say that there are ways the government support it, for instance, by funding organizations who are sending volunteers to those areas.
Got it. There's another question that we were asked, which I think is probably more directed at Lior, which has to do with legal action. So we've heard from you, Lior, that there are people who complain, people who don't complain. The question is whether organizations, nonprofit Israeli organizations or others, can take action themselves, be proactive in trying to take the settlers to court. If so, how can it be done? Is it being done at all?
Well, yes and no, in the sense that there are two sort of legal avenues. One of them is to, and both we do at Yeshdin, and also Peace Now does some. And the first is to assist Palestinians to file complaint. That's the only way for the police to investigate, because the police won't investigate otherwise. In most cases, in almost all cases. The problem is that when they do investigate, they often, if not in most cases, 9 out of 10 cases, they will close the case. Now that enables us to appeal against it, but it doesn't work. So we'll appeal and it doesn't work. The main sort of reasoning behind this is to expose, because it's very important for the state of Israel to tell you, the American public, to tell itself maybe internally, and that there's law and order, right? That we respect the law, and if somebody's assaulted, then she has a legal avenue, etc. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work if you're a Palestinian under the occupied territories, and this is what Yeshdin's data shows. The other sort of route is to attack the illegality of the structures, right? That's also very, very difficult. And I'll say more than difficult in the sense that without going into the details, I'll say that the governments of Israel are putting all their efforts in order to make it difficult. So you see these agricultural farms that Hagit showed us, many of them are illegal. It's hard. It's hard to tackle them. You see these outposts, they're all illegal according to Israeli law, and they're still there. And it requires activists, and it requires money, and it requires an NGO, and it requires a serious legal battle and a public pressure and international pressure. And the governments of Israel are standing behind them and using all their efforts in order to prevent it. And on the contrary, providing them money and support, etc. So legal battle are very important in order to expose, in order to allow us to organize and to challenge it. But this is not a legal battle. At the end of the day, it's a political battle, and it's very difficult. So the legal battle is only part of it.
So since it's mostly a public policy battle, we have another question here that has, or several questions actually, that have to do with what is it that organizations like yours do within the context of the Israeli public to try to rally support for fighting this phenomenon? And the other question, which we always get and we always want to answer, is what can Americans do? Maybe you want to start, Hagit?
Yeah, well, we are, all of our organizations like Yeshdin and Peace Now and others, we are there to bring the issue in the public debate all the time and not to let go of it. This is why we have the Settlement Watch to all the time speak about settlements and to bring it to the media and to make sure the information is there and to make sure that there is some kind of public debate about it. We try to put political pressure. Now with this new government, we have some allies within the coalition that help us or can be an address for our appeals. It doesn't mean that this government is at all moving anywhere in our direction or in the direction we want it to go, but at least we have some more leverage or more who to turn to. So we put more efforts within the Knesset and the government. And of course, there is the public activity and the media, the social media. We are demonstrating. We all participated in this week in the Knesset in a debate about the settler violence, and we will continue with that.
Lior, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add about the things to do, and I think Hagit, she summarized it great of what we're doing and what. I'll just say tactically why there is a hope for optimism, and it's because settler violence is so ugly, and settler violence makes anyone who lives in Israel ashamed, because it's pogroms, right? It's citizens of the state attacking non-citizens, backed by the state. Because what we saw the pictures of the soldiers, because there's no accountability, because there's no law enforcement, etc. And what we were trying to argue is that it correlates with the same purpose, right? It's taking over land, it's success, it's another tool. So if we manage to stop settler violence, maybe we will be able to at least really limit it. Will change in the policy towards the occupation at large. And I think we should utilize this moment where we're seeing these horrific pictures, and Israeli politicians and leaders need to answer. This is not acceptable, and they need to stop it. So I do think that we should take this moment and put our efforts in order to shame and to embarrass and to ask the Israeli government to stop this. Now, I think this is what our goal should be, to make settler violence. This is a political issue, right? So when American diplomats meet with their Israeli colleagues, they should talk to them about settler violence. When your representatives in the States talk to their Israeli leaders or whatever they speak with, they should discuss with them settler violence. and demand that they stop. Now, what you'll hear from Israeli politicians that this is a marginal issue. It's extreme. It's not widespread. It's bigger than what these lefty organizations are making of. But that's not good enough because you see the pictures, you see the data, and it's very severe. So I think we should take this moment where it's so harsh to demand more from the state of Israel.
And I guess, as you said before, Lior, politicians tend to talk about bad apples, but we should always remember that those bad apples are all in the context of a bowl, if you will, that is corrupt itself, which is the occupation, and that is violent as it is, as you pointed out. We have a lot of questions that have to do with the details, all sorts of details that have to do with the stats that Lior mentioned, with agricultural farms and so on. And what we'll try to do is, in that post-webinar email, include some links to reports that both Peace Now and Yeshdin have about these issues, because some of them are just, we just can't answer now. In fact, we probably have time for one more issue to discuss, or one more topic. We've had a few, actually quite a few, questions regarding Israeli government policy. It's something that you've touched upon before, but I thought that because so many people asked about it, maybe we should go into it in a little more detail. The main question is whether this new government that we have, which, yes, is headed by Naftali Bennett, but also has some parties that are more moderate, has this government shown that it intends to take some kind of a different policy, different attitude toward the issue of settlements in general, and law enforcement on settlers in particular?
Unfortunately, the policy, it's becoming more and more clear to me that the policy towards settlements and the issues of the conflict are not really changing. It's maybe the music that sounds a little different since Netanyahu, and it's more like less anti-Palestinian, but it's not at all changing anything on the ground. I believe most of you heard that the E1 plan, which is considered to be lethal for a potential two-state solution and for the potential development of a Palestinian state, is promoted by this government, and the hearing of the objections to the plan will take place on Monday. And that at the beginning of December, the plan for Atarot, for thousands of units in between Ramallah and East Jerusalem, is going to be discussed in the planning committee. And it's dramatic, and it's taking place. And maybe even because it's a new government, we take it less seriously, or we tend not to shake it too much because it's a fragile coalition, etc. So here we have a lot to work to make a real fight within the government. I think it's one of the biggest challenges for us.
Lior?
Absolutely, second every word Hagit said, and just to say that this government is working under the illusion, or sort of the compromise, that they're saying we're dealing with everything but not the occupation. We're dealing with everything not about the peace process or the two-state solution. And this is only afforded because the government right now doesn't, it's only afforded because they're sort of dismissing it. Right? It's unbelievable. And what does that mean, right? What does that mean that we're not discussing the occupation? We're not discussing the two-state solution? It means that it's eternal, that the Palestinians will just wait. And that's, I think, what we should push this government and push the leadership in the states and stuff to push the Israeli government on. It's what do you mean when you don't deal with the occupation, that you don't deal with trying to end it with the two-state solution or whatever? Does it mean that this is eternal? And if it's eternal, then what does that mean? And I think that's a soft point that the Israeli government needs to hear, because internally it works. They're not feeling the pressure enough. Of course, you have Peace Now, and they're a great work to try to push them on that. But other than that, it's not strong enough, and we need to think joint forces to try to challenge them on that. What does that mean that you're not dealing with the occupation?